Goedemiddag, good afternoon. I said hello to most of you, but not to everybody. Welcome. Good to see you here. Thanks for coming to our Learning and Teaching Enhancement Seminar, even in these extremely busy days. We are rounding off a great year, but there's still things to be done. But thank you for also coming to a seminar like this one, to reflect on the things that are important to us. And I believe you also come here because we continuously strive for excellence. And there are many factors that determine excellence. I would say most important is having professional staff in the faculties and the support divisions. The quality of your staff is a primary factor in the excellence of any institution. The second component, I think, that determines excellence is the kind of students that join us in our learning endeavor. And we are really fortunate at Stellenbosch to have excellent students. And I think that's what helps you to get up every day and to tackle a busy end-year program and try and invest in our excellent students. So uitnemendheid, ja, het te doen met jou personeel, het te doen met jou studente. En ek dink dit is wat ons by mekaar hou en dit is wat ons inspireer. But the third dimension, I think, is about the excellence of one's products. And at Stellenbosch we call them programs, academic programs. Because really, that's the result of our endeavors to put it in a structured format, to make sure that the quality is top class, world class, and to ensure that it remains fresh and that it inspires students to join us, to stay with us, and to be successful in those programs. I think we measure many things very well at this institution, but the one dimension that we need to pay even more attention to is trying to determine what's the real quality of our programs. But when it comes to quality, you can't really make a personal judgment. You have to get professional peers in your environment who can help you make that judgment after a thorough introspection and review. And all of this, I think, gives a background to why we need to talk about this today. Quality enhancement, sense making, and reflecting on program renewal. So I think it's very relevant. To me, it's one of the three factors. If that is done well, we can claim to be an excellent institution. So I want to say thank you very much to Andre Muller, Director in our Center for Academic Planning and Quality Assurance, and to Antoinette van der Merwe, our Senior Director for Learning and Teaching Enhancement, and to Marianne Bester, who can't be here today, but who's very much part of helping us on our road of achieving excellence in the way we design and offer our programs. Thanks for doing that. We're looking forward to your presentation. Baie dankie, baie welkom. En dankie vir die moeite wat julle ingesit het. Ons sien uit na interessante, stimulerende inset en dan kan ons gesels daaroor. Baie dankie, collega's. Dankie allemaal.
Thank you, Professor Skoonwinkel. Yes, apologies, Marianne is unfortunately ill, so she can't be here with us today. But you'll see her voice and her touch and a lot of her research in our presentation as well that we're doing on her behalf. And thanks also to Andre, my colleague, that's here, and the beautiful slides is his handiwork. I can't claim the beautiful slides. Okay, so we entitled it Finding Our Way in the Fog, Quality Enhancement, Sense Making, and Reflecting on Program Renewal. So we'll do it a bit backwards. I'm first of all going to reflect on our journey in terms of program renewal. Then I'm going to hand over to Andre to talk about sense making and quality enhancement and how we embed program renewal within the institutional systems. So how do we understand program renewal? And this definition, Andre actually asked me this morning, where does this come from? And this is a definition we came up with in 2016. And you'll hear a little bit more about 2016 and the University of British Columbia short course that we did then. But we then defined it, and I think it's still quite a relevant definition, as a process, an ongoing process, because often people think, okay, it's a project. We start with it, we finish it, then we leave the program for another 10 years. So it's an ongoing process with a goal of continuous improvement through a process of review. It's about a learning opportunity for all academic staff teaching on it, a program of study to collectively understand, and that's where the sense-making also comes in, and reflect on their teaching practice and its consequences for learning for those students that Professor Schoonwinkel talked about at the beginning. Now, as Professor Schoonwinkel also said at the beginning, it's quite complex and quite difficult, and we often don't really pay attention to our programs, and we want to refer to it as navigating that invisible layer, the program as an invisible layer. Because I think in the organization, our organization is organized according to faculties and departments, and often the lecturers focus on their modules for the most part, which are situated in departments. And then, of course, articulate from first year to final year and to postgraduate studies. Programs, however, are often that invisible layer that lead to qualifications, as opposed to a purposeful and structured set of learning experiences. And that's how the HEQSF actually describes a program. But often we don't really reflect on the programs, we reflect on the modules, and a lot of innovation happens in the modules. In terms of plotting the path and the journey we've come so far in terms of program renewal at Stellenbosch University, I don't want to say it started, but it was given new impetus in 2016 when about 11 of us did, including Prof. Schoonwinkel, the Total Leadership Certificate on Curriculum and Pedagogy in Higher Education. And we, as the four of us, myself, Gert, Andre, and Prof. Schoonwinkel, our project was towards a strategic approach for effective and sustainable program renewal in a South African research-intensive university context. A nice long title. And that's where we really started reflecting about the whole process. We did quite a thorough literature review of what is out there. And we also did some focus group interviews with all 10 faculties in terms of what the faculties and representatives saw as the typical barriers and enablers during this process. And what we found was, again, the whole issue of complexity of comprehensive curriculum change. We were reminded by Cobb that changes often happens on individual module or teaching methods level, and very rarely do institutions really embark on a comprehensive curriculum review. And I think that should have already signaled some warning signals to us in terms of the complexity of this whole process. What they also referred to was external, organizational, as well as faculty influences that are quite important to consider in all of this. We also did quite a thorough literature review of all the barriers and enablers that would facilitate such a process of program renewal at a university. And in the literature review, the external enablers and challenges and barriers became quite apparent in terms of government changes in legislation, professional bodies, a variety of external factors that could impact. Organizational, of course, the first one does not apply at all to Stellenbosch University or South Africa. Long and slow decision-making processes. That was identified in the literature with, of course, SAQA speeding up things, right, Melissa? So it's not an issue anymore. A shared vision, financial stability, and appropriate organizational infrastructure. So that can be both a barrier or it could be an enabler if we have that shared vision. Collaboration was identified as one variable. And Mortimer and Sartre actually said a program of study is not just a faculty responsibility, but a responsibility of the institution as a whole. So putting that within the institutional perspective. The support environment is very important, and it should encourage innovation and change. On a faculty level, I'm just taking out two of the issues that were quite pertinent in literature review. The individual within a faculty engage in the program renewal process, and you'll hear this again when we reflect on all the faculty's progress. The individual as change agent, but then also very importantly, and I'm sure it will resonate with many of you, a core group to oversee the process. So you need both. You need those change agents, but you also need a critical mass within a faculty to encourage this. So the journey since 2017, Jelly Salmon, lover or hater, but it was a catalyst. It was an event where all 10 faculties got together and thought critically about program renewal and review. The short course, the UCDG funding from 2018 to 2020, faculty-specific program review on renewal projects, the Vice Dean's Learning and Teaching think tanks. We had our program leader guidelines approved by Senate last year. And just as recent as last month and this month, we actually had workshops with all the faculties once again to reflect on how far they've come in their program renewal workshops or program renewal initiatives within their faculties. And what I'll share with you now is some of those results to give you an idea of where we're currently at with program renewal at Stellenbosch University. So yes, there's lots of planning and funding initiatives, there's policies and guidelines, there's the guidelines for the program leaders, there's a discussion document that Marianne put together on program review and renewal, there's a brand new quality assurance policy that Andre will also talk to. There's some money available for faculties for capacity development in terms of buying out or buying in academics, workshops, administrative assistance, as well as research. So there's quite a few elements happening. But reflecting as faculties and overall how far we've come and sharing that narrative, we found that some faculties tackle one program, some take multiple programs. There's different stages that people are in terms of the program renewal. And you know, when you read an academic article or when you put up a model, it often looks something like this, not messy at all. It's very neat. You go from this to that to that. You can see we've inserted, or Andres inserted, some back and forths, because what we found in the feedback from the faculties, it's never as neat as it seems within a model. A model, it just takes you that far, but what we found with the faculties and their feedback, often you go back and forth, or you jump across and you come back again, so it's never as neat as the model actually suggests. And what we also heard from all the faculties, and we'll still collate all the feedback that we received at the workshops, is that there are different motivations, overall goals and purposes, and that UCDG resources are used in different ways. So just to give you a glimpse of some of the motivations, overall goals and purposes that the faculties related to us. First of all, many of them are looking at relevance, the relevance of the programs, relevance in terms of responding to economic, societal needs. I know, Bradley, from your side, especially issues such as social justice from the law faculty, globalization, decolonization, transformative constitutionalism, fourth industrial revolution. But then also not just looking at that, but also looking at the profile of the prospective students. So in reflecting about program renewal, you've got to think about that as well. What about the achievement of SU graduate attributes? That's also something that came out quite clearly in all the workshops as one of the motivations and overall goals and purposes of your program renewal initiatives in the faculties. Employability and enhanced preparation towards professional status was another one that featured. Then external requirements, we cannot get away from those. Professional bodies, external stakeholders, meeting international professional body requirements, needs of stakeholders, technological developments, all of those things. So some of those external requirements also came through quite clearly. And then, of course, curriculum and program identity, which is a really interesting one. In terms of curriculum differentiation, program identity, and I'll talk a little bit just now about that as well. We're finding a shift towards not only looking at program level, but what is a BA? What is a BCom? What is a BSc? The whole qualification. So not just what is a BCom in management sciences, but what is the BCom degree overall? So we're seeing that happening. Impact of streams when qualifications and electives per stream. What is happening there? Inter, multi, transdisciplinary needs, continuous quality control. A very interesting one as well, a shift from just looking at the content, but now looking at the interplay between knowledge, skills, and values, attitudes, and dispositions, assessment, need to lessen the stress on students and staff in terms of content, volume of work and time. So these are just a snapshot and some of the motivations and overall goals and purposes that we heard from all the faculties on the 11th of September and as recent as about a week ago when we had the workshop with law and with the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences. And then one other motivation as well was improved timetabling, just logistics, and just one example of that. Activities and themes, I'm blown away at how busy the faculties have been. The themes tackled really tough stuff, employability, threshold concepts, financial sustainability, critical citizenship, academic literacy. So the faculties are not shying away from those really difficult topics to address within the program renewal efforts. And there have been a plethora of activities in terms of establishing teams, program renewal teams, task teams, core group teams, stakeholder input, sharing between the faculties in terms of surveys that were done by the faculties, industry, advisory forums, professional bodies, benchmarking whole programs to other programs in South Africa as well as worldwide, desktop analysis, and then lastly, lots of workshops, planning, mapping, capacity development workshops, lots of those were happening. You also actually identified as faculties many enablers and challenges during these past 2 workshops that we had. Some of the enablers include leadership, guiding principles, brainstorming. Oh, I love this. I never knew this was an enabler, but it is definitely for me to get my stuff done. Deadlines. Positive peer pressure. I remember when we did the UBC course, that was one of the most motivating factors, because if we had a deadline and we got together, the positive peer pressure of saying who did what and who didn't do what was quite important. Rhythm of regular program renewal and review activities. Admin and tech support that was made available through the UCDG. Educational expertise, robust discussions and disagreement. That was actually an enabler for many of you. Willingness to learn, reflective practice, responsiveness and adaptability. But of course, there's lots of challenges as well. And one is the messiness of the process. It's just not easy. As well as one of the big challenges is change and the impact on time and complexity. So those were some of the challenges that were identified by the faculties. And change is really difficult. And I was reminded when I listened to all the faculties and their feedback of this quote by Buller, all organizations resist change. After all, that's their job. The whole purpose of any organization is to act in ways that are regular, consistent, and predictable. And regularity, consistency, and predictability are natural enemies of change. So I was reminded by that quote. But despite that, shift is happening, I believe, if we reflect on the past 3 years. And some of the shifting practices that we can observe is a move from modules to programs, a focus on modules to programs to whole qualifications, as I already mentioned. Secondly, not just looking at programs preparing a student for one job, but possibly multiple jobs. One academic pathway to multiple. Content focus to knowledge, skills, values, dispositions, and attitudes. And we're finding a much more intentional and structured way to look at our programs, as you can see with the purposes and goals. And then not just lectures, but blended experiences. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, because I think in terms of complexity and change, one way of addressing it is through sense making. Thanks, Andre.
Thank you so much. So you would have seen and noticed that all of Antoinette's slides happen systematically, introducing you to the concepts as she's talking about them. That's not going to be my slides. Sense making is a messy affair, and what we have realized is that sense making, using that as an entry point into thinking about what is this that we're doing with program renewal is quite a useful idea. So I'm very glad that Marianne Bester was appointed. She's recovering from a unplanned surgical, what do you call it? Not a surgical, laparoscopical procedure. So she's very sad for not being here today. But she is tremendously well versed in the literature of program review and renewal. She guided CPUT through its extensive program alignment process with the HEQSF. What we know in terms of the literature is that all of these program review and renewal processes are very much practice-based. It's not theoretical, purely theoretical, it's not conceptual, it's really much getting your hands dirty. Then we know that there are many disciplinary differences. It's different to deal with a program in the hard sciences and to the soft sciences. It's different within a faculty of arts and social sciences when you deal with languages as opposed to the more social sciences. And then we also know that quite often our challenges are with individual academics that either are keen to work on their learning and teaching and thinking of a program and thinking how their modules fit into it, or that could also be the constraints where people say, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we know it's complex, iterative, reflexive, messy, and it's really about academics making sense of who they are and what they're doing. So in terms of sense making, it's social in nature. It's us discussing and arguing and having different opinions. It's very much about how we feel we are in terms of what we do. What is your identity as a historian, as an engineer? What is it to be an electrical engineer as opposed to a mechanical engineer? What is it to be in a faculty of education doing an honors in education? Obviously, with making sense, we look to the past, and we have at least now built some data around what has happened in the past in terms of throughput numbers and things of students, and we also document what changes have been implemented over the years. But in terms of this practice-based activity of sense making, we know it's ongoing, and that we as individual agents can actually enact a change in terms of where we're going to. And even though we have some evidence that we can base it on, it's also sometimes linked to a bit of your gut. You're feeling that this is a plausible explanation. I think that if I do this, that could be a better result. So with Marianne's help, we've entered a new phase of program review and renewal where we're getting some tools for us to also understand and reflect and use. And she developed with her colleague Jones, she's going to present this still at the Heltasa conference, what we affectionately called the dartboard in terms of decision making. Because you might start off with thinking of forms of a knowledge and a threshold concepts, because that's what Julie Salmon said. Threshold concepts, that's new, it's the new buzzword, we happy. But then your thinking leads you to, but what is actually the ideology of what I want to become? What's the theoretical perspectives? How should these threshold concepts link to that? And then it's about, but how do I achieve that? What is the changes that I can do differently? Or what are the graduate attributes? Or then we start benchmarking, and then we move back to program delivery. How do I do things differently? So many different aspects, and maybe a compass is a better metaphor to use rather than a dartboard. Less random and more directional. That at least if you know there are all these different facets, and that it is okay to jump from the one quadrant to the next, or the one segment to the next, then it helps you to think about how can we make sense within the bigger macro issues, also within the institution, and then also within my module in terms of actually doing something different there. We've also been lucky that in terms of the Center for Academic Planning and Quality Assurance, where we've initially been 3 people for a very long time, one focusing on academic planning, one on quality assurance, and one attending a lot of meetings. We have additional capacity now in quality assurance, which is really desperately needed, because for the most part, we had one colleague, Maya, who facilitated all the evaluations for the whole university across all the faculties, and then, just in addition, all the support services as well. That's a tremendous task to do all of that. Now we also have the extra capacity of Marianne, who's in program review and renewal, which is almost that in-between space. We have Melissa that focuses and helps and guides and advises academics when they develop new academic programs or when they want to introduce changes to existing programs. That's if you're looking at the continuum of quality assurance to quality enhancement, that's a quality control aspect of making sure that you've thought about everything, that your credits are correct, that the details are correct, that your program naming is correct. Then at the end, we've got the enhancement activities, where you now take this program that exists and you think about how do you improve it. It's a daunting task to work within higher education. When we work in these teams, it's useful to have support service staff, academics, people from different disciplines. I remember as well from the UBC, we sometimes called those groups networked improvement communities, small groups that can work together. Etienne Wenger also had this concept or notion of communities of practice, which I think we can all intuitively understand. What is it to be a forestry wood person? What is it to be a philosopher? But he also coined the term landscapes of practice, because as I might be an amateur chess player and a pro table tennis player and not a very good academic, I move into those different communities of practice, into different circles of influence, and all of those practices are separate and distinct, but you have got to be able to navigate through those different terrains. Why I'm mentioning that is, for most of us, our disciplines are our main community of practice, and the educational discourse is very much secondary to that. So in the higher education landscape currently, we know there are many quality control activities, and we know there are many quality enhancement activities that we are striving towards. And really to reflect on the program level is to step into the shoes of a student and experience what that learning activity is in terms of being and becoming a particular graduate. So in terms of sense making, we've really taken up those concepts of Marshall and Wake, and we've incorporated that into our quality assurance and enhancement policy. In the past, we had a guiding framework, and we had some points of departure in terms of quality assurance, but we've now taken it through all the faculties, and it's been approved by Council and Senate. And we have some very good principles that are laid down, and some of them are in tension with one another. We know that we want evidence-based rigor in terms of our self-reflections, yet we want to keep it simple and transparent and easy to use. We know that we want a holistic and systemic approach, yet we have to focus sometimes on very particular themes and aspects. In terms of the provisions, we have changed very slightly the nomenclature of our previous points of departure in terms of we no longer talk about internal evaluation and external evaluation. That could be the case, that we invite people from externally, but in terms of evaluation, we think that's the self that evaluates the self. So evaluation is stepping back and thinking about the value that you as yourself would be adding. And sometimes that self is a little bit broader than just you, the academics in your department or within the program. It also includes your advisory forum, your professional body. And in terms of external evaluation, we've changed it to peer review, because that's really the foundation on which the academic mindset works. We review, we relook at what you've done as your peers, and you then take that up and you use it within a continuous system, including all the stakeholders in terms of improving what you're busy with. Right, so let's just briefly stop and think about our actual 10 different faculties. Because this policy now allows for self-evaluation and peer review, and for quality enhancement activities. It allows for thematic reviews. It also defines particular roles and responsibilities for the dean and the departmental chairs and the program leaders. So as program leaders and deans, you're supposed to create that thinking space within which you can play and be creative and reflexive. If we look at the faculties, the I hope you can recognize your faculty colors there. Law has just gone through a national review, a 4-year qualification, we've been accredited. Yet, you want to work on it and you want to change it. And the postgraduate programs have decided, well, they won't have just one master's program, but have more focused programs. That's more or less what they're grappling with. Should they have different departmental reviews or a whole faculty review, also including the legal clinic? Then medicine and health sciences, they're doing a 6-year program for doctors, and they're changing it drastically, but I mean, we're still getting doctors, which is a good thing. And they are very much scrutinized by the HPCSA, the Health Professional Council of South Africa. Yet their postgraduate offering, if you're training as a subspecialist in cardiology or surgery of I don't know, your heart, it's very tricky to now impose another layer of quality assurance and control mechanisms on top of that. So given the policy of self-evaluation and review, maybe within that faculty they would like to do something quite different at the postgraduate level in terms of thinking about the departmental organizational structure, how they work with staff that are appointed by the health department. It's quite a different setup to maybe the next one, which is military academy, where you've got the Department of Defense, and you've got students that are mainly doing undergraduate programs and are probably slightly underprepared in terms of maybe having the same entry requirements as we have on Stellenbosch campus. I can talk through all the faculties. There's engineering, there's agri-sciences. There in agri-sciences, it seems as though they do a departmental evaluation of, let's say, viticulture and enology, wines and grape sciences. And then after they've done their departmental evaluation, they're primed to do their program review afterwards. And the same with wood and forestry, conservation, ecology, and so forth. Faculty of Arts and Social Science is herding cats. How on earth do you actually get people together in the room? Who, of all the different languages that a student could take, do you invite to partake in this idea of a program? It's almost contrary to what a Bachelor of Arts is. If you have a history student, then there's a logical module stack and articulation to articulate to your honors and your masters. But that's one view on it. How do you think in which different programs the history module also fits into? Education has just aligned all their qualifications with the minimum requirements for teacher education, Mr. Tech. And maybe they're at the stage of reviewing now their blended learning hybrid honors programs. So all of these faculties that I've mentioned are at very super unique stages in their thinking about how to go forward with program review and renewal. Our policy allows for that flexibility in terms of having your departmental reviews, having more faculty thematic reviews, and also having professional body reviews, and then also program reviews. So what happens afterwards? We often do things because we get money, and we stumble into a project, and then we run with it. And the literature shows, but this is not a project. This is an ongoing process. So we somehow need to find a way of embedding this that we've done now with the additional help of the finances to really embed it as a faculty and also across faculties in our inter-transdisciplinary programs to work intentionally in terms of consistently thinking and critically engaging with our curriculum. And in terms of that, we need to really draw on our resources in terms of student input and also recently graduated students. I think we're very weak at that at this stage, to really draw on students and include them in the process and also know how and at what stages and points in the discussions they can really add the most value. And then we don't yet know all this learning that happens, where do we take this? Is this the adequate forum? I mean, at least with departmental reviews and support service reviews, we've got the quality committee, and that's a subcommittee of Senate. With any of the quality control mechanisms that we think about in terms of programs, we can either take it structurally to the academic planning committee or to the committee of learning and teaching if it's more pedagogical in nature. But what do we do with program review and renewal? Where do these committees, these reports and these learnings feed into? How do we distill good practices? We don't quite know yet. So it's always good to end where you've started, especially if we talk about reflection. I'm always reminded of Anton saying that for the engineers, reflection is just looking to a mirror. What is this now? So let's reiterate this, that program renewal is understood as an ongoing process, continuous improvement through review. And it's a learning opportunity, it's a sense-making activity to collectively understand and reflect on the teaching practice and its consequences for learning. And that is where we open the floor for discussion.
Thank you very much for a very enlightening presentation, and I think it's very good for us who've been part of the project to get this bird's eye view of what happened across the institution. But I think back on a discussion that we had recently in a departmental meeting about, for example, the B.Ed program in our faculty. And the discussion was on who takes responsibility to ensure that all the modules in that program will actually be taught next year. And there was a difference of opinion in terms of whether this is the head of departments, the different heads of departments' responsibility, or whether the program coordinator should actually take that responsibility. Now, I'm just giving this as an example of how I think organizational structures impact on processes of program review and renewal. But apart from this faculty internal challenges with departments contributing to programs, I think an even bigger challenge lies in what we read about the Fourth Industrial Revolution as requiring graduates with much more interdisciplinary skills, knowledge, etc., to be able to function in a new world where they will have to reinvent themselves quite often. So if it's such a challenge at faculty level, how much more will it become a challenge when we have different faculties contributing to programs? So maybe if we can just get your inputs on that.
Well, I'll start and then Andre will finish. I think we already have experienced to a limited extent of that, Magda, in the Economic and Management Sciences faculty, where they span, and I remember how complex their processes are. And I don't think there's anybody, Sharon, I think you here. Yes. So, I mean, there's lots of complexity in that. That just adds that whole layer. And our attempt was with the program leader guidelines to try and delineate the roles and responsibilities of the departmental chairs, program leaders, dean, deputy dean, teaching and learning. We try to say what those roles and responsibilities were, with a caveat that every faculty also has its own way of doing things. Because it is incredibly complex. It's not just across departments, but in EMS's case, across faculties as well. And we were hoping with the concept of a program leader, not taking away the responsibilities of the heads of departments or the vice dean or the dean, but to try and create that other layer of coordination and management and taking responsibility for a program. But it's very difficult because we had, for instance, some of the program leaders saying, but we're quite a junior member of staff. But now we've got to go to a very senior member of staff, and we actually wanted to look at student feedback in the whole program, and not only to a senior colleague, but to somebody in another faculty to ask for their student feedback. So what is the correct way now of navigating this maze to actually get it? And I'm the program leader. So yes, I don't think we've got firm answers, but I think the program leader role is one way of attempting to deal with that. Andre, I don't know if you want to...
I could just say in terms of changing the wording of you being a program coordinator to a program leader, I think there's a little bit of more power given to that role. I would be more drastic and just scrap departments as a total and just do away with faculties. Why do we need them? And if we don't have them anymore and we fund everything according to programs, then we'll be forced to think in terms of programs. Yet that is probably not the route that we're going to take.
And I think that's also what I mentioned at the beginning with the invisible layer. Everything, the way we organize, actually mediates against the fact of programs, because we've got departments, we've got modules, and module chains leading up to honours in chemistry or honours in physics. So it's a.
Yet we've found in all our workshops that the time is right for people to share, and also share across faculties and across programs. And yes, there are frustrations. When you develop a biomedical engineering program or health and nutrition, and you work across food and nutrition,
Yes.
When you work across faculties, then you have to think of their timelines as well in terms of their approvals. And a module might be nested in different programs. So it is complicated, and we don't have very clear, good solutions. But if we upskill our academic staff to be able to traverse that pedagogical landscape, I think we can have a common language for talking about it.
Can I, with my overly structured mind, try and contribute on thinking of the program leader needing some power, authority, and clear role description to influence the product, the program. So we went, I think, a long way already in the new policy to define that role more clearly as a reference. So you have to assign some power there. And then that program leader also needs reference power. That's somebody to whom he or she can refer to that has a bigger influence inside the environment, say it's a faculty, also across faculties. That would typically be your deputy dean teaching. So he or she really needs that reference power. But just another dimension. When you try to develop a program or change it, then you're dependent on resources to make that happen. And the resources sit within the departments, the academic entities. So that's also a home where some power resides. The influence there is not as direct for the program leader, but there's another very direct influence. And that is for the department's academic functions as far as teaching is concerned. They have a lot of power of their own, but they have strong reference power and connection to the deputy dean teaching. So that's where a lot of the power lines come together. And it's really balancing the two. One is the resources being made available. The other one is the program being affected and executed. Comes together in that triangle. And I think the knooppunt, that would really be the role of a deputy dean teaching. Okay, who else? Who's next? Anton. We have a few more minutes because I know some of you have obligations to do.
I just want to add a perspective that I don't think is different to what we've said, but I think it may be useful from the aerospace industry. I think we must be very careful with an overly structured top-down approach. In engineering, it's called systems engineering. And in the aerospace industry, space programs are notorious for system engineering because of the peculiarities of space programs, which makes a process very, very slow, very rigorous, very top-down. And in the aerospace industry, that is, in the military aerospace industry, that was often applied. But there was also the opposite, the so-called skunk works, Lockheed Skunk Works, which intentionally broke the mold. And there the internal process, the development of the plane, which in our case is a educational program is a complex engineered system, just like an aeroplane. They had a very, very informal structure to develop the plane. The testing and qualification is still very structured. It has to be for safety. But the development process is very free. So I think in our university, we often complain about the many options that we have to handle. It makes us, as that are on a management, it makes us crazy to, or we've just gone through our faculty with documenting the processes for PhDs and master's degrees. There's so many ifs and buts and else's in that process. It's crazy. But it's because of that I think we are very effective. So I think we must also value this incredible complexity that we allow, where every faculty can adopt a different plan. Because I've seen some universities where everything is determined top-down, and it really becomes much more inhibitive. So as a principle from the aircraft development engineering system process, my recommendation, let's keep the development process as free as possible, and place our focus on the quality assurance after the fact. Don't try and quality assure the process too much. That inhibits the process. Just quality assure the end product. Just a perspective.
No, I think from my side, Anton, I think that's not the idea, to over-engineer or to over-control that whole process. But I do think what we're trying to put a lot of effort is to create an enabling environment so that creativity can flourish, and that
exactly is the Skunk Works idea. You put a lot of people together, give them an environment, give them incentives, don't give them a structure, give them incentives, give them an environment, enabling environment, and their creativity will sort out the rest. So in that sense, I think we are doing a lot of that already, and we must not be ashamed of not structuring the development process rigidly for all faculties in the same way. I think it's a good thing that is not structured.
And I mean, if you see how far we've come in 3 years and all the exciting things happening in the faculties, I think it attests to the success of that type of approach.
Okay. I think this last comment is quite important, because it touches on something which we value very highly, and that's our academic freedom. So we want an environment where we can freely explore and think, yet at some point we have to systemize it and make it official and have some measure of quality on it. So thanks for a fascinating introduction to the two of you, and to Marianne in her absence. Thanks, colleagues, for attending. I hope it's been thought-provoking. Thanks for the thoughts that you put into the discussion towards the end. Have a good afternoon, and all the best for finishing off the academic year.
For those of you who have not signed